There are buildings that touch the sky, and then there are those that seem to own it. Pierce Langford Enterprises stood like a monument carved from ambition itself. 48 floors of gleaming glass and polished steel rose above the city, reflecting clouds and sunlight in a way that made the structure seem almost untouchable. Inside, everything whispered wealth. Marble floors stretched endlessly. Chrome elevators ascended without sound, and even the air felt expensive, filtered and cool. Power lived here, not in voices but in silence. The kind of silence that made people speak in hushed tones, as if the building itself demanded respect. The boardroom, gods on the top floor, the executive boardroom, waited behind double doors. The space was designed to intimidate. A long table made of dark mahogany stretched beneath a wall of floor-to-ceiling windows. Below, the city sprawled like a kingdom that existed only to serve those who sat in this room. The morning light poured through the glass, casting sharp shadows across leather chairs and pristine notepads. Nathaniel Pierce sat at the head of the table. Everything about him spoke of control. His tailored navy suit fit perfectly, his silver cufflinks caught the light with each movement, and his expression remained unreadable. He was the kind of man who could silence a room simply by existing in it. His voice, when he spoke, carried the weight of someone who had never been told no. Across from him sat Victoria Langford, a woman who wore elegance like armor. Her designer dress was flawless, her posture perfect, her smile calculated. Every gesture seemed rehearsed, as though warmth was something she had learned to imitate but never truly felt. When she laughed, it sounded beautiful, but it cut through the air like glass. Next to her, Gordon Shaw leaned back in his chair with the easy confidence of someone born into wealth. Chief of operations, he carried himself with an air of superiority that felt natural to him. His words always dripped with judgment, and his smirk never quite reached his eyes. Around them sat other executives, men and women in expensive suits, nodding at the right moments and smiling when expected. They discussed quarterly growth, market expansion, and profit margins with the passion most people reserved for things that actually mattered. The invisible woman in the corner of the room, almost unnoticed, sat Clara Evans. She was Nathaniel's executive assistant, the person who made sure everything ran smoothly without ever being seen. Her fingers moved quickly across her tablet, updating notes, scheduling calls, and organizing files. She worked with quiet precision, anticipating needs before they were spoken. When Victoria handed her an empty coffee cup without looking, Clara took it with a small smile. When Gordon asked for documents, she had them ready before he finished his sentence. Not once did anyone thank her. In this world of titles and corner offices, Clara was invisible. Just another part of the machinery that kept the empire running. But those who bothered to look closely might have noticed something different about her. There was a calmness in her eyes, a steadiness that seemed out of place in a room full of anxious ambition. She observed everything. The way Victoria's smile faltered when Nathaniel ignored her compliments. The slight tension in Nathaniel's jaw when profit reports fell short. The emptiness that echoed even in their victories. The meeting continued in its usual rhythm. Numbers were discussed, strategies debated, success measured in cold percentages. Nathaniel's voice cut through the room with surgical precision. "Quarterly growth is acceptable," he said, turning a page with a crisp snap. "But acceptable is not why we are here," everyone nodded. Victoria smiled her approval. Gordon adjusted his tie with satisfaction. Clara typed every word into the minutes, her expression neutral. From the outside, it looked like perfection, a well-oiled machine of human excellence. From within, it was something else entirely, a theater of ambition where connection had been traded for control. The cruel invitation, as the meeting drew toward its end, the conversation shifted. Victoria mentioned the upcoming charity gala, the annual event that brought together investors, politicians, and the elite. Her tone turned playful, dangerous. "The guest list is looking impressive this year," she said, her red nails tapping against the table, "though I always find it amusing when ordinary people try to attend. You know, secretaries in their department store dresses thinking they belong among diplomats." Soft laughter rippled around the table. Gordon grinned. Imagine one of them showing up. Bless them, they would think polyester was silk. More laughter, louder this time. Nathaniel did not laugh, but he did not stop them either. He simply watched with an expression somewhere between boredom and amusement. Victoria's eyes glinted with mischief. Perhaps we should extend an invitation to one of them. For charity's sake, of course. That was when Nathaniel spoke, his voice smooth and deliberate. Why not? He said. The room went quiet. He turned slightly, his gaze landing on Clara at the end of the table. Miss Evans, he said, his tone polite, too polite. Would you do us the honor of attending the gala this Saturday? The question hung in the air like a blade suspended by thread. Whispers began immediately, soft gasps. Muffled laughter. It was a joke. Everyone understood that. An invitation designed not to honor, but to humiliate. Clara looked up from her tablet. Her eyes met Nathaniel's calmly, without shock, without anger, just steady and clear. Thank you, Mr. Pierce, she said softly. I will consider it. Her tone was not submissive. It was not defensive. It was simply calm. Like a stone dropped into still water, creating ripples that would spread farther than anyone expected. A few executives exchanged confused glances. Gordon's grin faltered. Even Victoria's laughter caught in her throat. Nathaniel blinked, surprised by her response. He had expected embarrassment, maybe a nervous decline. Instead, he received quiet dignity. Clara lowered her gaze and resumed typing. The meeting continued, but something had shifted. Words stumbled. Eyes darted toward her and quickly away. It was as if a small crack had appeared in the flawless surface of their perfect world. The quiet resolve. When the meeting finally ended, people filed out in their usual rhythm. Chairs scraped. Conversations resumed. Victoria lingered near Nathaniel, whispering something that made him smile, though not kindly. Clara packed her notes, closed her laptop, and stood to leave. As she walked through the corridor, her heels soft against the marble, she caught a glimpse of the company motto engraved on the wall. Excellence above all. She paused for just a moment. Excellence above what? Above kindness? Above humanity? Above people? Outside, the city hummed with life. Horns honked. Footsteps echoed. The pulse of millions who lived beyond these glass walls. Clara stepped into the elevator, her reflection staring back at her from the polished doors. For years, she had made herself small, invisible, useful. She had learned to survive among giants without needing to roar. But as the elevator descended, something inside her began to shift. Silence, she had learned, could be powerful. And tonight that silence had found its voice. By the next morning, the story had already grown wings. What began as a careless joke in the boardroom drifted through the corridors of Pierce and Langford like smoke, invisible but impossible to ignore. The assistant had been invited. The secretary, Clara Evans. It started as a whisper near the coffee machine. Then it became a conversation in the elevator. By lunchtime, it had transformed into an office-wide sensation that nobody could stop talking about. Did you hear? Mr. Pierce invited her to the gala. No way. That cannot be true. Oh, it is. Victoria confirmed it herself. And that was all it took. Clara's name began to circulate like currency, passed from desk to desk, floor to floor, each repetition adding a layer of mockery or pity. Everywhere Clara went, conversations paused just a second too late. Eyes glanced her way, then quickly turned. Laughter followed her down hallways, light but sharp, like the sound of breaking glass wrapped in silk. Victoria made sure the flames stayed fed. She had a talent for cruelty disguised as concern. In the executive lounge, surrounded by investors, she spoke with a voice dipped in honey. I think it is sweet, really, she said, swirling her coffee. Clara works so hard. I suppose she deserves a night out, even if she has no idea what she is walking into. The others laughed, eager to align themselves with her judgment. Do you think she will actually come? Someone asked. Victoria's smile widened. I hope so. Every event needs a little entertainment. The laughter grew louder, but beneath it something darker stirred. The cruelty of people who mistake power for worth. The weight of mockery back in her small office, Clara heard enough to understand. She did not need to catch every word. The tone was sufficient. Pity wrapped in politeness. Concern, pretending not to be judgment. She sat at her desk, eyes fixed on the glowing screen, fingers steady on the keyboard. Yet inside, a quiet storm was gathering. Not anger, not bitterness, something deeper, a reckoning with herself. When the workday ended and the city lights began to replace the fading sun, Clara took the train home. The seats were half empty, filled with tired souls heading back to small apartments and deferred dreams. She stared out the window, watching the city blur past. 1,000 lives she would never know. Her building stood on the corner of Maple and 6th. Old bricks, creaking pipes, rent that stretched her paycheck thin every month. But it was home. Inside, the apartment smelled faintly of coffee and old books. Ethan was at the kitchen table, textbooks spread around him, a half-eaten sandwich forgotten beside his notes. He was 19, lean and full of restless energy, studying engineering on a scholarship he had fought hard to earn. "Hey," he said without looking up. "Long day?" "The usual," Clara replied, setting down her bag. Ethan glanced up, his eyes sharp with understanding. "Which means terrible." She let out a soft laugh, the kind that fades before it reaches the heart. "Maybe a little of both." He closed his book and studied her face. "They said something, didn't they?" Clara hesitated. She had always tried to shield him from the cruelty of her world. But Ethan was not a child anymore. He saw more than she gave him credit for. "Mr. Pierce invited me to the charity gala," she said quietly. Ethan's eyebrows rose. "That sounds nice." It was not meant to be. He understood immediately. The silence that followed said more than words could. He stood and walked over to her, his presence steady and supportive. "Then do not go," he said simply. "You do not owe them anything." Clara walked to the small window above the sink. Outside, the city glittered in the gathering darkness, 1,000 lives chasing meaning under electric stars. "Maybe I do not," she said softly, "but I do not want to hide either." Ethan studied her profile, the calm that had become her armor. "You do not need to prove anything to them," she turned to face him. "Maybe not, but I need to prove something to myself." The box beneath the bed later that evening, as the city settled into its restless sleep, Clara stood in her small bedroom. The walls were plain, decorated only with a few photographs and a calendar marked with work shifts. It was a simple space, humble and honest. Beneath her bed sat a box, old worn, taped at the corners. She had not opened it in years. She knelt on the floor, the carpet rough beneath her knees, and pulled it out. Dust clung to her fingers. Her heart beat slower, heavier, as though her body knew what memories waited inside. The box carried pieces of a life she had once lived and then folded away. Photographs of smiling children under African skies, letters from teachers she had trained, a worn program booklet from an awards ceremony she never attended, and at the bottom, wrapped carefully in tissue paper, lay the dress, midnight blue, silk that caught light like water, delicate stitching along the neckline. Simple, timeless, beautiful. She did not lift it out immediately. She just stared at it, her breath slow and measured. This dress was supposed to be for a night of celebration years ago, before tragedy had turned her world upside down, before she learned that sometimes grace survives best in silence. Memories of another life, Clara's fingers brushed the fabric, and suddenly she was somewhere far away, under skies filled with dust and hope. Years ago, she had worked in Kenya as part of a humanitarian initiative. Her job was to bring education to rural communities, to build schools where none existed, to train teachers who would carry knowledge forward long after she left. She lived simply then. A single room with a fan that barely worked, nights lit by lanterns instead of electric lights. But there was joy in that simplicity. Every morning brought the laughter of children learning to read. Every evening brought the satisfaction of knowing her days mattered. Her name appeared in newsletters. Her photograph was printed beside words like courage, hope, and change. She was young then, bright-eyed, full of belief that compassion could reshape the world. The dress had been for an award ceremony in Nairobi. The organization wanted to honor her leadership after she coordinated relief efforts when floods destroyed their school supplies. She had saved for weeks to buy it. Not because she loved luxury, but because she wanted something to mark the moment. Something simple and timeless. She never wore it. The phone call came the day before the ceremony. A storm? An accident? Her parents' car on a rural highway back home. Just like that, her world collapsed. She left Kenya that week, packed her belongings in silence, promised she would return someday, though deep down she knew she would not. The dress came with her, folded and untouched, placed at the bottom of her suitcase like a promise she no longer believed in. After that, life became smaller. Dreams turned into routines. The world she once hoped to change began to feel distant, almost unreal. She convinced herself that humility meant hiding her light, that service meant making herself invisible. Now, years later, that same dress lay before her. A tear slid down her cheek before she even noticed. Not from sadness, but from recognition. She whispered softly to herself, "You used to be brave." Outside, the city lights flickered against the curtains, painting soft patterns across the walls. For a moment, she could almost see her younger self reflected there, standing tall, unbroken, eyes full of conviction. Ethan stirred in the other room, murmuring something in his sleep. Clara smiled faintly, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. In the quiet of that night, she made her decision. She would go. Not because of pride, not because of defiance, but because every woman, at least once in her life, deserves to be seen for who she truly is. Not her title, not her salary, not her silence. She would walk into that gala not as an assistant, but as the woman she used to be and the woman she had become. The morning after. The next morning arrived soft and silver. Sunlight filtered through thin curtains, dust floating like tiny stars in the air. Clara brewed her coffee slowly, each movement calm and deliberate. Every gesture carried a new stillness. Not hesitation, but resolve. She took the dress from the box and held it up to the light. The silk caught the sun, rippling between shades of blue and black like deep water under moonlight. When she held it against herself in the mirror, a strange peace settled over her. The dress was not just fabric. It was memory. It was redemption. It was a quiet reclaiming of everything she had lost and everything she still carried. She ironed it carefully, smoothing each crease as though she were erasing years of invisibility. When she finished, she hung it by the window where the morning light made it glow. Ethan walked into the room, rubbing sleep from his eyes. He stopped when he saw the dress. "Wow," he said softly. Clara turned to him. "Do you think it is too much?" He shook his head. "I think it is exactly enough." She smiled, her first real smile in days. That afternoon, she took a walk through the neighborhood. The air smelled of fresh rain and blooming flowers. She passed a small flower shop where white lilies sat in buckets by the door. The owner, an older man with kind eyes, smiled at her. "For luck," he said, offering her a single stem. She accepted it, her fingers brushing the soft petals. "Thank you." Back home, she placed the lily in a small glass vase by the window. The blue of the dress and the white of the flower together seemed to speak of new beginnings. That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of gold and purple, Clara stood by her window watching the city below. For the first time in years, she did not feel invisible. She simply felt ready, and as night settled in, she whispered to herself, almost like a prayer, "Tomorrow, they will see me, but more importantly, I will see myself." Outside, the city continued its endless rhythm. Sirens wailed, laughter echoed, footsteps hurried past. Life moved forward, unaware that one quiet woman had just decided to reclaim her light. Saturday evening arrived like a breath held too long, waiting to be released. The Bellevue Grand Hotel stood illuminated against the darkening sky, its golden lights spilling onto the streets like liquid warmth. Luxury cars lined the entrance, delivering guests wrapped in designer gowns and tailored suits. Photographers waited behind velvet ropes, cameras flashing like stars trying to capture moments that would be forgotten by morning. Inside, the ballroom was a vision of excess. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like frozen waterfalls, scattering light across champagne flutes and polished floors. White orchids adorned every table, the scent of expensive perfume mixed with the fragrance of roses. Waiters moved through the crowd with practiced grace, offering caviar and smiles that meant nothing. The orchestra warmed up in the corner, violins and cellos humming softly, preparing for the evening ahead. Everything was perfect. Everything was controlled. Everything was exactly as it should be. Victoria Langford made her entrance precisely at 7:30. She wore a gold gown that shimmered with every step, catching light like armor made of sunlight. Her hair was swept into an elegant twist, her jewelry subtle but unmistakably expensive. She moved through the crowd with the confidence of someone who knew she belonged at the center of every room. "Victoria, you look stunning," a woman gushed, clutching her pearls. "Thank you, darling," Victoria replied, her smile perfect and cold. "Though I suspect tonight will be memorable for reasons beyond fashion." Around her, whispers had already begun. The story had spread beyond the office walls. Guests leaned close to one another, sharing the delicious scandal in hushed tones. The secretary had been invited. People wondered if she would actually come, if she would dare to walk into a world so clearly not meant for her. Victoria heard every whisper. Each one pleased her. The stage was set for humiliation, and she intended to enjoy every moment. The man who could not stop watching. The door Nathaniel Pierce arrived shortly after, tall and commanding in a black tuxedo that fit him like a second skin. He moved through the crowd with ease, shaking hands and exchanging pleasantries with investors and politicians. His expression remained neutral, his voice steady. To everyone watching, he seemed perfectly composed. But inside, something stirred, a restlessness he could not name. His eyes kept drifting toward the entrance. He told himself it meant nothing, that she would not come, that the joke had already served its purpose. Yet he could not stop looking, Victoria noticed. "She always did. Expecting someone?" she asked, appearing beside him with a glass of champagne. "Just observing," he replied coolly. She studied his face. "You know she will not come. People like her understand their place." Nathaniel said nothing, but her words sat uncomfortably in his chest. An hour passed. Guests filled the ballroom, laughter growing louder, conversations blending into a symphony of privilege. The orchestra began to play, soft and elegant. Background music for people too important to truly listen. People began to relax. Relief spread through the crowd like a shared secret. She was not coming after all. The joke had ended before it began. Victoria smirked, lifting her glass toward Gordon Shaw. "I suppose she knew better." Gordon laughed, the sound too loud, too eager. Wise decision on her part. But Nathaniel remained silent, his gaze still fixed on the entrance. Something in him felt strangely hollow, though he could not explain why. The moment the world stopped. Then, at 9:15, the doors opened. The room did not fall silent all at once. Silence has a way of spreading slowly, like water seeping through cracks, until suddenly everything is submerged. She stood framed by the golden light of the entrance. Clara, her hair was swept up loosely, a few soft strands brushing her neck. The midnight blue dress moved with her like liquid shadow, elegant and timeless. She wore simple pearl earrings, no elaborate jewelry, no dramatic makeup. Just herself, present and whole. She was not trying to impress anyone. She was simply there, standing in her truth. For a moment, nobody moved. The orchestra continued playing, but the notes seemed to fade into the background. Champagne glasses froze halfway to lips. Conversations died mid-sentence. Every eye in the room turned toward her. Whispers began. Soft and disbelieving. "That is her. The secretary. She looks extraordinary." The crowd parted slowly. Instinctively, as though making way for something they did not fully understand. Clara walked forward, her steps unhurried, her expression calm. She was not smiling, but there was warmth in her eyes, the kind that disarms cruelty without ever speaking a word. Nathaniel froze. His glass trembled slightly in his hand. He had expected embarrassment, perhaps defiance. What stood before him was neither. It was grace. Pure, quiet, undeniable grace. Victoria's smile vanished. Her fingers tightened around her champagne glass until a hairline crack appeared in the stem. A thin line of red appeared where the glass cut her finger, but she did not notice. Her eyes were locked on Clara, fury and disbelief battling behind her perfect facade. Clara reached the edge of the crowd. Her gaze swept across the room, taking in the chandeliers, the orchestra, the faces watching her. Then her eyes found Nathaniel. She walked directly toward him. The distance between them felt both infinite and impossibly small. When she stopped in front of him, the entire ballroom seemed to hold its breath. "Good evening, Mr. Pierce," she said softly. "Thank you for the invitation." Her voice was not defiant. It was not bitter. It was simply honest, and that honesty struck him harder than any accusation could have. Nathaniel opened his mouth, but no words came. For the first time in his career, the man known for absolute control had nothing to say. Around them, the orchestra played on. The chandeliers shimmered. But the energy of the room had shifted completely. Something fundamental had changed, and everyone felt it. The dinner that revealed. Everything dinner began shortly after. Servers moved between tables, placing elegant dishes before guests who barely noticed what they were eating. Conversations resumed, but the tone had changed. The easy arrogance was gone, replaced by something quieter, more uncertain. At the center of the ballroom stood the grand table, reserved for the most important guests. Nathaniel sat at its head, Victoria to his right. And to his left, in a choice that surprised everyone, sat Clara. The room noticed. Every glance, every whisper acknowledged the quiet shock of her presence there, seated among people who had spent the evening expecting to mock her. Victoria's smile was tight, her movements sharp. She lifted her wine glass, her voice honey-sweet but edged with venom. "Clara, you must tell us where you found that lovely dress." "It is so unexpected." Clara met her eyes calmly. "It was a gift to myself. From a time when I believed special occasions mattered, the response was gentle, but it landed with precision." Around the table, a few guests exchanged glances. Gordon leaned forward, eager to join the game. "Tell us, Miss Evans, what is it like living in the real world? You know, without private jets and penthouses?" Soft laughter rippled around the table. But Clara did not flinch. She placed her fork down quietly, her movements deliberate. The real world is filled with people who work hard, love deeply, and still sleep soundly at night. The table fell silent. Victoria's smile faltered. Gordon cleared his throat, trying to laugh it off. "I suppose we could all use a bit of that humility." Clara's voice remained soft but steady. "Humility is not something you use, Mr. Shaw. It is something you remember." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the clinking of silverware seemed to pause. Nathaniel stared at her, truly seeing her for the first time. In a room full of brilliance and wealth, she commanded attention without demanding it. She held power without wielding it. Victoria lifted her glass, forcing her voice to sound light. "Well said. Refreshing to have perspective." But beneath her words, tension pulsed like a wire pulled too tight. The truth revealed. The main course arrived, and conversation resumed cautiously. Guests asked Clara polite questions, surprised by her thoughtful answers. She spoke simply about her work, about the importance of service, about finding meaning in small gestures. Then from across the room, a voice called out. "Excuse me," said a man holding a camera, his press badge glinting in the candlelight. "Forgive me, but are you Clara Evans?" Every head turned. Clara froze for a heartbeat, the question hanging in the air like a confession waiting to be spoken. The journalist stepped closer, his eyes wide with recognition. "You worked with the Global Education Project in Kenya, did you not? I remember the article. You coordinated relief efforts after the floods. You built a temporary school from nothing. You were featured in World Impact magazine." The words fell like stones into still water, creating ripples that spread endlessly outward. Nathaniel's expression changed from confusion to disbelief. Victoria's smile vanished completely. Gordon stopped mid-sip, his glass frozen halfway, to his lips. The whispers began. Immediately. That is her. I remember reading about that. She was the one who organized those literacy programs. She was just an assistant. Here. Clara's cheeks flushed, but she did not look away. She simply nodded once. Yes, that was a long time ago. The murmurs became a wave spreading from table to table. Clara shifted in her seat, visibly uncomfortable. It was not just me, she said softly. There were dozens of incredible people working there. Teachers, volunteers, students. I only helped connect the pieces. Her humility only deepened the silence around her. Then, from across the room, an elderly man rose to his feet. His cane tapped softly against the marble floor. Samuel Brooks, one of the most respected philanthropists in the city, a man whose donations had built schools and hospitals around the world. He approached slowly, every step deliberate, his eyes fixed on Clara. I knew I recognized that name, he said, his voice warm but firm. Miss Evans, you and your team rebuilt entire communities when most of the world had turned away. You trained teachers, created programs, gave hundreds of children their first chance at education. Clara shook her head gently. I only tried to help. He raised a hand. Please do not diminish what was done. I remember reading your report on sustainable education. It was brilliant. You should have been leading organizations, not taking notes for men who forgot what service means. The words struck the room like thunder wrapped in velvet. Nathaniel felt the sting, the shame, the truth of it settling deep in his chest. Around them, people began to applaud, slowly at first, then louder, rising into genuine admiration that could not be faked. Clara blinked, stunned. She looked around at faces that had mocked her now, clapping, smiling, leaning forward as though trying to make amends. Victoria did not move. Her glass remained poised in her hand, her knuckles white. The applause sounded to her like the cracking of glass, the sound of her carefully constructed world beginning to fracture. Samuel Brooks smiled kindly at Clara. We need more people like you in this world. People who build, not just command. People who remember that leadership begins with listening. Clara stood, her voice soft but clear. Thank you, Mr. Brooks, but I only did what I believed was right. The world is full of people who give quietly. I was just one of them. The applause grew again, warmer, longer, more genuine. Nathaniel rose from his seat, caught between admiration and crushing guilt. In that moment, all his power, all his wealth, all his titles felt paper-thin compared to the quiet dignity standing before him. Victoria leaned close to him, her voice sharp and low. You cannot let this become her moment. Nathaniel turned his head slightly, his voice calm but final. It already is. Victoria drew back, stung by the truth she could not fight. The orchestra began to play again, a slow and emotional melody. The applause faded into a respectful hush, and in that hush, something irreversible had shifted. The secretary had become the story. The woman they had dismissed now stood as a reminder of what they had all forgotten. Nathaniel watched Clara, and for the first time in his life, he understood what true power looked like. Quiet, humble, unafraid. As the evening continued around them, one truth remained clear. This night would not be forgotten, and neither would the woman in the midnight blue dress who had reminded an entire room what dignity truly means. The end.